Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today's topic here is how the country of residence in a double taxation treaty is to be determined. And the first thing which we probably want to know is why this is necessary. Well, all the articles which distribute the rights of taxation between the two states involved always use formulas like a taxpayer of the one state does something in the other state, then what happens? So to understand these formulas correctly, you must know to which state a taxpayer belongs. You can't fill in the correct values for these variables, the one state and the other state, if you don't know of which state the taxpayer is a taxpayer. So to which state you belong, if you are German or if you are French for a treaty. So that's of utmost importance. And even if you do not belong to either of the two states, then the whole DTT is not applicable at all. That is already said at the first line of the double taxation treaty, that the DTT is only applicable to persons who are resident in at least one of the two states. Naturally, that's nearly a self-evident thing, because the formulas always say a taxpayer of the one state in the other state. And now imagine Germany and France agreed on a rule that license fees go to the country where the taxpayer lives, where he is resident. Then naturally, if the taxpayer is resident only in Mexico, you can't reasonably assume that Germany and France want to give the right to tax 500 million license fees, not to one of them, but to Mexico. That would be reserved to another treaty. So, if there is no residence in neither of the two states, then the whole treaty is not applicable. There is, however, also another possibility that one could give arguments that you are resident in France and find arguments that you are resident in Germany. Then the result would be a chaos, because imagine again a license article says royalties go completely to the country of residence. Then the Germans would say, hey, it's our money, he's resident in Germany, and the French would say, no, our money because he's resident in France. And then everybody would say, you are wrong, no, you are wrong. It would go up to the courts would decide, the German court probably in favor of Germany, the French court in favor of France, and both sides would say, my judgment is correct, the other decision was wrong. So you would end up with a chaos and complete double taxation. So the whole treaty system would not work. So you need a clear and undisputed outcome for where is the taxpayer resident. And the following video will make you familiar with the rules which govern that question. So where you are resident. To give you an overview, here was the testing scheme for double taxation treaty cases. We have already spoken in the last videos about how double taxation is avoided, exemption or credit method, so the last step. Now this is the first step now to come, residence. And the OECD model convention begins relatively early with the rule which defines where you are resident. That makes sense because before you don't know where you are resident, you are not able to read all the rest of the rules. So Article 4 relatively at the beginning says where you are resident, and so let's have a look into that. The start is a basic rule. You always have to start with that basic rule. It might be, if it leads to no clear outcome, then you have to go on to special rules, determining in cases of conflict which state wins. But the basic rule has always to be tested. It's always the starting point for sorry, no God, I hope nobody has been injured. This rule is always the starting point for every statement on residence. You always have to begin there. Even if you say, I know about the center of interest of the taxpayer, that will certainly be decisive. So you might feel the temptation to jump immediately there and answer directly that question. But that would be wrong under a formal aspect, because Article 4.2 and Article 4.3 can only be applied if Article 4.1 doesn't lead to a clear result. So that Article 4.1 ends up in an unclear result is condition for the application of the other paragraphs. And it might also lead to a wrong outcome if you skip over and jump over some of the steps in between. So 4.1 is always your starting point. 4.1 is relatively complicated. Here are some results for the outcome. 4.1 says you are resident in a state where, due to criteria like the seat, the place of management, your domicile, the habitual abode, or similar things, you are subjected to taxation. That would, for example, lead for A GmbH to the result that it's resident in Germany under 4.1, because due to the seat, it is subjected to unlimited taxation. So because of its seat in Germany, it's taxable here. In case of a B Limited, which has seat in UK and has place of management in Hamburg or head office, that would be resident in Germany because due to the head office in Germany, the place of management, it would be subjected here to taxation. So the wording of 4.1 is a bit complicated, but if you simplify the basic idea in easy words, then you can rephrase that. 4.1, first sentence, you are resident in a state if you are subject to unlimited tax liability in that state. That is what that first sentence means to say. Why don't they just simply and plainly say you are resident where you are subjected to unlimited tax liability? Well, there's a simple answer. That term, unlimited tax liability, is a German technical term. Other countries call it differently. So you would create enormous differences for readers from 200 states of the earth if you use here just the technical term which is familiar only for one nation or two. So what they did in the OECD Model Convention text is they described that situation in a way that everybody can identify his or her variant of unlimited tax liability. So that's the only reason why that term doesn't show up in the words. And in order to make that wording which they choose, that description, really idiot-proof, they even added a second sentence. You are not resident if you are taxed in that country only with inland income. In plain words, we can paraphrase that. However, you are not subject to unlimited tax liability if you are only subject to limited tax liability. Here you see which efforts an international text makes in order to secure that it's never be misunderstood. So in plain words, 4.1 is plain and simple. Check where the taxpayer is unlimited tax liable. There he, she, or it, if it's a company, is resident. Full stop. Question solved. So this basic rule of 4.1 is in most cases already a sufficient solution, because most people are subject to unlimited tax liability only in one state. So let's think about examples. We have the French citizen François. Et François habite à Paris. That is French and means he lives in Paris. And he gets income from interest from Germany. Now the question is, who can regard him as his taxpayer? Well, according to 4.1 of the OECD Model Convention, François, in English Francis, is a resident of France if he is subject to unlimited tax liability there. That's the case. Now let's make the counter check. If François is also regarded as unlimited taxpayer in Germany, and the answer is no. So we have a clear and undisputable outcome from 4.1 test. François is a French person for that treaty, Germany-France. Further examples, well, again a French citizen, now it's Geraldine. And Geraldine has given up her French home years ago, and she has moved to Cologne in Germany already years ago too. Now, for the treaty Germany-France, where is Geraldine resident? Let's look to the simple rule of 4.1. You are resident where you are subject to an unlimited tax liability. Geraldine lives in Cologne, so in Germany she has unlimited tax liability. Clear. Does she have unlimited tax liability in France too? Well, under French law, this is probably similar to German law in that point. She has no residence, no domicile, no habitation in France. So France says, we are out, and the Germans say, win. So Germany wins. Geraldine is a resident of Germany because she is only subject to limited tax liability in Germany. Okay, let's think about another example. An English person. This is now Marvin. Marvin has income from France and from Germany. And Marvin has a first home in London, where he spends most of the year, but a secondary home in Germany, which he uses from time to time to live here and sufficiently regularly. So the treaty Germany-France, is Marvin entitled, and is Marvin a resident in one of the two countries? Well, let's test if Marvin is subject in Germany to unlimited taxation. The answer is yes. Now, from France, he has income, but not a home. No unlimited tax liability in France. So we have one country, Germany, which says he is resident in our country, and France says, okay, not in ours. So after the first round of this check or testing scheme, the matter is already clear. Marvin is for the treaty Germany-France, a German resident. So we treat him as a taxpayer of Germany in the language of these things. Okay. However, these were the simple cases. There might be cases where somebody is subject to unlimited tax liability in both states. In that case, you need an additional solution. We already pointed out that. Because there must be one residence only in one treaty. Otherwise, you end up in chaos. For example, the royalties go to the state of residence, and all the other income, which is never discussed anywhere in the treaty, goes to the state of residence only. So you need to know where the state of residence is. Otherwise, all the rules in the treaty don't work. So Article 21, for example, gives money to the state of residence only, so you need to know where the state of residence is. So if a taxpayer is unlimited tax liable in Germany and also in Farawaystan, because there he has another home, then Article 21 would not be clear if there is no clear determination that you are only resident in one state. The Germans would say he's resident in our country, we claim everything which has not explicitly been discussed. And the Farawaystanis would say he's ours, we get everything which has not been explicitly discussed in the treaty. So a double residence is a bad thing. We need to go on. We need solutions. And these cases are not so rare as it seems. Even with the globalization, these cases become more and more frequent. For example, if you are a student and live in Germany at the moment, you probably have also still rooms in the home of your parents, so you have a double residence. You are probably unlimited tax liable in Germany and unlimited tax liable, however this is technically called, in your home country. So You could imagine cases like this. Dominique is a French artist and has her home in Paris. She has, however, a second home in Germany, which she regularly uses for a part of the year always. Then under 4.1, she's resident in France because there she has unlimited tax liability, but also in Germany due to the second home. So we need help. We need a second rule. The same might apply to Harold, Englishman who lives in Paris during holiday in Germany. He gets sick and has to stay in a German hospital for 2 complete years, lying around, moving nearly never. Under 4.1, Harold is resident in France because he lives there, has a habitation there, unlimited tax liability. Now, also under German law, he is unlimited tax liable because he doesn't have a home in Germany but a habitual abode. If you stay in Germany for more than 6 months, you usually are deemed to have a habitual abode in the inland. If you do no business related activity in that time, the time period extends to 12 months. So if you just lay around in a hospital, you have 12 months time before you trigger a habitual abode. But Harold was not satisfied or content with 12 months. Harold needed 2 years, and so he triggered a habitual abode in Germany. And so from the beginning onwards, retrospectively, Harold was unlimited tax liable in Germany. So under 4.1, both countries could claim him as resident, and that's not possible, so we need an additional testing step. Further conflicts which might happen. Irene, imagine she is US citizen and lives in Bonn in Germany, the former capital. Under 4.1, she would clearly be resident in Germany because she is unlimited tax liable here because of her home. In the US, however, she will be taxed with a worldwide income because of her citizenship, so that might bring along a double residence. We need rules. Now, these rules, ladies and gentlemen, will have no other outcome than to say that one of the 2 countries is kicked out and that the residence remains only in the other of the 2. So that is why these rules which now follow are sometimes called tiebreaker rules. If you have connections with both states, the connections of yours with one of the 2 states will be deliberately ignored in favor of the other one. So you need additional rules, and you started with 4.1, and in case of a natural person, you have then to check 4.2. In case of all other persons, so mostly juridical persons and associations and all the stuff which is not a human being, you check 4.3. Well, let's now think about what happens. You begin with 4.1, double residence is the outcome, then you go step by step through Article 4.2 if you have a natural person. The first criterion which decides is the permanent home. That is, to make that clear, not a home where you permanently live, but it is a home which is permanently available for you, so which permanently is yours. So it's a kind of what we would call a domicile or a residence under national law, a habitation which you keep and intend to use from time to time. That is a permanent home. If you have a permanent home in 2 countries, which might happen, some people have several houses where they commute between. Okay, then you also need another thing. Then the idea is we look for the state with which you have the closer connections. That is the center of vital interest. Center of vital interest is defined as a state to which you have the closer private and at the same time the closer economic connections. So both criteria must point into the same direction, then that state is the winner. If there is no clear outcome, then we need another criterion. That would be the habitual abode, then, where you usually stay. Now people might have no clear habitual abode. For example, that they always pass half of the week at home and half of the week at the other home. or that they even change day by day between the states. Um, Another conflicting situation would, for example, you have a home in France and you have a home in Germany, but during all the time in question, you were in prison in Texas in the U.S. Then your habitual abode was in the U.S., and that would not help to decide if Germany or France has the closer or better claim to regard you as a resident of Germany or France. So in that case, you would ask for citizenship of the taxpayer. Now you can already imagine what could go wrong on that level. There are people who have double citizenship. Then there are people who live in Germany and in France but are citizens of Belgium. Is imaginable. There might be people who are stateless refugees. In that case, also that criterion citizenship leads to nowhere. And then a last step is a desperate step proposed by the OECD, which then says, in that case, where all the reasonable criteria which we can imagine at all, where all these reasonable criteria failed to decide between the two states, then the two competent authorities, so the German and the French administration, shall agree on where you are resident. The problem is they are not forced to do so. And a good tax advisor will never tolerate a situation where a client comes to that point. Because imagine you apply to the fiscal authorities, well, please determine where I'm resident. There is no reasonable criterion to decide on that. All these have already failed, but please make an agreement without reasons, just because one is nice and the other is not so nice. You can imagine that the more important that case will become, the less willing will the two officials taking part in the negotiation be to give in. Imagine your personal situation. You are working in the tax administration, or you are young and you hope for a career, and now somebody sends you to a negotiation with somebody from France. Please agree on where a taxpayer is resident. There is no reasonable criterion to base the decision on, and there is only one additional information. You know that when the taxpayer is resident as a consequence of your agreement in France, then 500 million license fees will go to France. If not, they will go to Germany. Can you now imagine that this tax official goes happily to that negotiation, comes back, tells his boss, okay, we quickly and well solved the situation. I just gave in, he's French. Then probably the boss will say, okay, what about their next promotion? I have some very good jobs to offer you. The first idea is to become Germany's official attaché to the embassy in the last country in the world where we fear that cannibals might take over and eat you up. Or you might get promoted to help foreign countries in the Sahara Desert to count or to make a complete inventory of the sand of the Sahara without weighing or estimates, just by counting. Your career will be ruined. So in practice, such negotiations can be imagined to work as follows. The German guy goes into the room, says, hello, here I am. By the way, I have a family. That means I can't end my career. I need promotion over time. And then the French says, well, nice to hear that. Congratulations. I also intend to have a family in the future. So both said, okay, we can't give in. The next solution is probably, okay, let's postpone the talk to next year. Perhaps next year somebody is on the verge of retirement or so that we can make an agreement without that somebody loses all career chances. If not, we just postpone the agreement again to next year. So this is highly risky to depend on such an agreement. You might have a chance if one case is worth 500 million and another case is 490 million. Then it might be that the two get courageous, throw a coin, naturally a neutral coin from Switzerland in all probability, and then decide the matter this way. Otherwise, you can only pray to God, and God will probably take a long time to answer your prayer. So a good tax advisor or tax consultant will always take care that letter D never comes up, never becomes relevant. You must make a case absolutely clear with regard to residency. Okay, but now how would things work in case of double residence? Imagine A lives in a home in Germany but is arrested abroad for a criminal offense or political reasons or whatever, and now spends 2 years in a prison in Far-Away-stan. Where is A now resident under the Treaty of Germany and Far-Away-stan? And the answer is unlimited tax liability in Germany continues because the habitation or residence in Germany is not given up. But you also have unlimited tax liability in Far-Away-stan because of habitual abode in the Far-Away-stani prison. So under 4.1 we have double residence, so we need 4.2, and letter 1 says first alternative, test the permanent home. Well, now a prison cell is not a home. You don't intend to keep it and stay in it, and you can't dispose about it as if you were the owner or the tenant. So only Germany, only there you have a permanent home. So Germany wins, you are a resident of Germany, congratulations to Germany. Far-Away-stan gets a second place in the run, which is completely senseless, so residence in Germany is decided. Well, another case. B has a house in Berlin, Germany, and a second house in which he spends the time of the year regularly, whenever he has free time, in Spain. B's family and private contacts are in Germany. The job is in Germany. Spain is only a holiday home. Where is B resident? Well, 4.1 says unlimited tax liability is potentially given in both states. 4.2, permanent home is in both states because both homes are not permanently used but are permanently available for use. That is a permanent home. So we must look to the center of private and economic interest, the closer private and economic relations. The private relations clearly point to Germany, the economic ones too. So Germany wins the race. Germany is country of residence. Spain gives up. Next example, C has a house in Germany and a second house in Paris and France. C's family and private contacts are in Germany, but the job is in France and no other important economic interests are outside of France. So when we look to what else happens, then we find out C spends Monday to Friday always working in France. Some weekends he travels home to the family, but not all of the weekends, because that would be too expensive and time consuming. And when he has holidays, he spends them with the family in Germany. Where is B now resident? Well, 4.1, unlimited tax liability exists in both states because he has a home in both states. Permanent home also in both states. The closer private and economic relations, so the center of vital interest is private relations, Germany, job relations, France. So no clear decision. You need to go on, and the habitual abode here would decide it's France, because here nearly all the time he is in France, and the visits to Germany are only short-time visits. So lives in France. France is country of residence for the application of the treaty. C is a French taxpayer. The German citizen D has a house in Dortmund where he lives, but D also has a house in Dublin, Ireland. The house in Germany is where the family lives. The house in Dublin is mostly because he lives there, because he is an investment banker who has been sent to Dublin, a bank, for 2 weeks or so, 2 years or so, to work there and gain experience. So there is the main job relation, and the only one. But now, no, banker is the wrong example here, but for the job, you move to Dublin, and now D has been sent. Sorry, I misremembered the example. D has been sent now for the whole year to a construction site in Mexico. So, where is the residence under the DTT, Germany, Ireland? In that case, we would construe this as follows. For one, unlimited tax liability in both countries. Permanent home in both countries. Center of vital interest, well, private Germany, economic Ireland, no decision. So now habitual abode counts. Habitual abode is in a third country, gives no potential decision between Ireland and Germany. So citizenship, German citizen and only German citizen. So Germany wins, resident in Germany. Huh? Now, what happens in the case of all other persons? Let us now look to that. If we have a person which is not a natural person, so not a human being, but a company, juridical person, association, or a club, or what else, then we check 4.3. 4.3 has naturally a more simple constellation. What can happen? How can double residence happen in case of a company? Imagine a GmbH is a company, has the seat in Germany, but the place of management in the Netherlands. The consequence would be unlimited tax liability in Germany because of the seat, and unlimited tax liability in the Netherlands because of the place of management. So under 4.1 we have a double residence. Each of the two states claims a GmbH. We need a clear decision. So we need a rule. In case of a British B Limited, it can have a seat in London, but it can have a place of management in Germany. In such a situation, 4.1 would say both countries claim residence, and that cannot work, so we need an additional rule. Okay, this rule is 4.3 of the OECD Model Convention that has a traditional version and a modernized version. The traditional version is still included in most German double taxation treaties, and that traditional rule is very simple. If under 4.1 a juridical person is regarded as resident in both countries, so if you have double resident, then the place of management is what counts. So that brings clear decisions. For example, if a GmbH, our favorite first example from a few minutes ago, if a GmbH has a seat in Aachen and the place of management in the Netherlands, the place of management wins under 4.3, so GmbH is resident in the Netherlands. So for the application of the DTT Germany Netherlands, a GmbH is a Dutch taxpayer. B Limited had its office, its seat in London and the place of management in Germany. 4.1 leads to no clear decision. Solution must be found in 4.3. B is resident in Germany because it is a place of management which counts for the final decision. So for the application of the DTT, the limited is a German taxpayer. Okay. You must keep in mind that 4.3 is only used if before Article 4.1 has led to a case of double residence. You can't just jump to 4.3 without testing 4.1 before. That's important and going to be important in the future. So if you have a registered office in GB and the place of management in Germany, and you have income from a permanent establishment in France, now check the treaty Germany-France, what happens? You think of double residence, but it's not the case. In the treaty Germany-France, checking Article 4.1, here is unlimited tax liability in Germany. Now check France. In France, you only get income. but you have there neither the seat nor your place of management. You only own a shop there. So B is not subject to any kind of unlimited tax liability. So 4.1 brings a clear decision. 4.3 is forbidden. The situation in Great Britain is completely without any importance for the bilateral relationship Germany-France. So here you see the difference, why it's not always allowed to directly use 4.3. 4.3 is here neither necessary nor allowed at all. That construction that a company is unlimited tax liable in two countries has often been used as a tax-saving construction. I can't go in the details here, but the effect is, for example, or one of the effects of being resident in two countries is when you have the treaty between A and B, and you have the seat in A and the place of management in B, then you are clearly resident in only one of these two states. But then for every treaty between state A and other states, C, D, E or so, 4.1 says you are resident in state A, so you can claim all the benefits from the treaties made by state A. Now, if you look to all the other treaties of state B with the rest of the world, state C, D, E, F, G, H, and so on, 200 states, then you are also under 4.1 resident in state B because you are unlimited tax liable there. So you can also invoke all the benefits of all the treaties of state B with these other states. And imagine you have something done in state C, then you can say, under the treaty of C with state A, I'm entitled to a certain treatment. But under the treaty which C made with B, I'm entitled to a better treatment, so give me the better treatment. That is very often the case. So you can combine the advantages of several, for example, two different treaties with a country in order to obtain the best combination possible. You could even obtain profits from a DTT with a country where one of the two countries has no DTT at all concluded with. So you can strongly improve your position here, and sometimes the outcome might be something which the administrations involved did neither foresee nor like. So the multilateral instrument, which has been written in order to change all the DTTs by new clauses somewhere, and in order to get rid of unwanted tax-saving constructions worldwide at once. That MLE proposes to exchange 4.3, the old clause, by a new clause, which sounds differently. In that case, 4.3 shall be replaced by a new clause, which is proposed by Article 4 of the MLI, where by reasons of the provisions of a covered tax agreement, so where in an existing DTT between two states who signed the MLI, a person other than an individual, so a company or another juridical person or somebody else who is treated like a juridical person, not a human being, is a resident of more than one state, the competent authorities of the contracting jurisdictions shall endeavor, so shall try only, to determine by mutual agreement the contracting jurisdiction, so the state of which such person shall be regarded to be a resident for the purposes of that double taxation treaty. Here you see, here happens exactly that, what was the last resort and the desperate resort in cases of a natural person. When all reasonable criteria failed, the two administrations shall meet and decide where you are resident, to which state you belong. Now with companies, that is directly proposed now. In cases where there is confusion, the two administrations shall freely decide where you are resident. So that was again the maximum risk situation. I explained to you, in case of a natural person, if somebody gets 50 million license fees, imagine now, or 500,000. Now imagine a fiscal officer who just says, okay, I give in. Goodbye money, goodbye career. Here, that happens with companies, and it happens from the beginning onwards. You have two states who can claim residency. Here, 500 million might be in play. Can you imagine that somebody says, okay, goodbye, a resident in your country? So here is directly the maximum risk that they cannot agree on an agreement. So having regard to its place of effective management, that says when they negotiate where you're resident, the place of management should be an argument, but then the place where it is incorporated or otherwise constituted, and other relevant factors, all that can be arguments. Nothing is decisive. So completely arbitrary decision placed into the hands of two persons who later probably have to justify their decision in front of superiors. That's the maximum risk. You can't allow them to play cards or to find another solution. They need arguments, but all of them have equal value. So naturally, that 4.3 new clause directly goes on to say what happens if a no agreement can be reached, of course. If you haven't realized that risk, they now knock on your door and tell you, okay, that is what we are going to do. You have to expect that there will be no agreement. And in case of no agreement where you are residents, the person in question shall not be entitled to any relief or any exemption from tax which is promised by the Double Taxation Treaty, apart from those advantages which the two officials from the administration agree to give you. So no guaranteed right to any consequence of that treaty if you have a double residence. So the idea is if they want to give you something, they can do. But if they don't want to, they can deny everything to you. That is nearly the nuclear bomb of taxation. That threat is so immense that in the future, no tax consultant or tax advisor or whoever you call him or her will ever tolerate the risk that somebody establishes a double residency, apart from the cases where you have well established that even if there is no agreement on residence, the outcome is still better than having a clear situation. And that will be rare, ladies and gentlemen. So this new clause is proposed by or prescribed or demanded to implant by the MLI for all existing rules for double residency cases of a non-natural person, or also to be added into all treaties where up to now no tiebreaker rule for a juridical person yet exists. So that is intended as the standard clause for all DTTs from now onwards to the future. The OECD replaced the old proposal of 4.3, the old version, by the new one in the new update of the Model Convention. Already in the 2017 version, you have the new version proposed for new treaties. So you can expect that for the future. What you must see is, naturally, this new tiebreaker rule is in principle limited to the relationships between the two states A and B. When I told you what the consequences of double residency are, A and B make a decision, and then you have afterwards, you can invoke the treaties of country A with the rest of the world because you are resident there. You can invoke all the treaties of B with the rest of the world because you are resident there. That still remains. The only thing which happens is what you can no longer know is how A and B, so the states which have the most importance for your taxation, because they both claim your worldwide income, how they agree on sharing the prey. That is now completely unforeseeable for you. And so questions arise, well, who will agree to tax, or who will claim the right to tax the rest of your worldwide income? Who will get the license fees, etc., etc.? So the effect is the new clause 4.3 creates deliberately uncertainty about the legal situation of our taxpayer, of this company, at least in the relationship A and B. And this is so extreme that it is a strong deterrent against trying such a constellation. If you do not know which of the two states which claim your worldwide income will in the end apply its tax law, and if there is a risk that they both do it and say, well, it's not our fault, we couldn't reach an agreement with the other state, that is such an extreme risk that you are strongly deterred from doing that. And that's the purpose of that. This legal uncertainty is deliberately created. 4.3 new version has the message, okay, if we think you really deserve help, then we have here a possibility to help you if we want to, and if we think our personal career can survive that. You should realize clearly that the international community has, by agreeing on that new clause, deliberately renounced on very fundamental principles of taxation. First, you know from the beginner's lectures, that tax rules should be laid down in a law, and that there should be legal certainty about taxes, because otherwise your ownership position is impacted. You can not use your money if you don't know how much the state will afterwards claim from it. If you don't know what remains as net income, you can't freely dispose of your money. You can't even completely dispose of your money. So your money and your ownership is not worth what it should be anymore. And that is now affected by that new clause, because under the new clause, it's no longer the law which decides about your tax. It's the completely arbitrary agreement between two completely unknown officials, which are bound by no reasonable foreseeable criteria. That is something completely different from laying down the rules in a law, which perhaps is a bit complicated to understand, so that there might be a dispute about the right understanding and interpretation. Here we have a version which says, okay, perhaps you will have some help against double taxation, perhaps not, perhaps we will do something, perhaps not. So the usual restricted, foreseeable, disputable uncertainties when it comes to the potentially right or wrong interpretation of a legal rule has here been replaced by complete darkness. And it's the darkest darkness which you can imagine. So here, it's especially dark because you have no idea which set of legal rules might apply to you. If even, it might be that you end up completely without protection. So that is a good indicator that the international community takes refuge to things like that the traditional tax systems become more and more completely helpless with regard to the new globalized world, which makes sense. All these tax systems have been developed in times where you had a nation state and an economy only within a nation state, that there were worldwide contact that was theory and mere theory in former times. Now, since the 1980s, 1990s or so, we have a multinationalized world, multinational companies, and we have the knowledge of people who internationally communicate and look for the loopholes and look for favorable tax constellations. And that is something where the theoretical framework of our existing tax systems was completely unprepared. and is still completely unprepared. All these people try to defend systems which were designed for a world which no longer exists and which can not be brought back, at least not without a complete breakdown of many things of everyday life which we have become used to. So that's a problem which is here built in the new clauses. And probably for these legal doubts, which or these negative aspects on the legal aspects, the MLI does not demand that all signatory states automatically take over the new clause. They can refrain from doing so if they declare that they have already put in place other sufficiently well-working clauses which prevent a double residence. So a state can declare that the new clause shall not apply to its DTTs overall, or shall not apply to individual of its DTTs, but it's also possible that a state brings forward, I want even to make things clearer, harder, by explicitly stating that if the two authorities do not reach an agreement, then the privilege to invoke the treaty can be completely denied, even that there is no compromise. So that's even harder. In the final effect, the mere existence of the possibility that the DTT rules of a treaty which already exists might be overwritten when the MLI was or enters into force, that these clauses might be overwritten by that new clause, is such a high risk for tax planners that they will usually refrain from creating double resident entities at all. This now brings along for EU states a special problem, because if they have the new clause in the relation with another EU state, then they get a problem with the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, because the freedom of establishment is there described as the freedom, among other constellations, to set up the headquarter in another member state. And that is exactly that double residence constellation. And now the new clause makes that effectively impossible. So there is a question if the new clause for EU countries can be chosen at all. It's not clear what would come out in a juridical discussion. The European Court of Justice usually holds the view that the member states, until there is no harmonization, can freely decide to which constellations and cases they apply their legislation and where do they not apply their legislation. But the problem here is that the rules on when the laws are applied and when not are deliberately created in order to prevent that a certain constellation, which is explicitly promised as possible by the EU treaties, that the new clause is explicitly made to make it impossible to make use of that specific form of the right of freedom of establishment. So according to the traditional rules of legislation, the ECJ might tolerate this, but it should not do so, because here the agreements on international legislation have been used deliberately in a way to make constellations which were guaranteed by the EU treaties, to make these constellations deliberately impossible in practice. And that should be a red line for the court's jurisdiction, irrespective of how you could construe arguments to declare that in theory that is all harmless and should be tolerated. By the way, for Germany, the problem doesn't seem to be so important, because Germany seems to intend to make usage of that opt-out from the new clause, so that Germany intends not to make usage of the new clause and seems to keep the old 4.3 clauses where the place of management is decisive. However, Nobody knows what happens in the long run. It might be that when a new double taxation treaty is negotiated, the other contracting state insists on the fourth week clause. So one doesn't know if this clause doesn't enter in the long run also into the German legal situation. Okay. This was, I hope, enough for today. Now, I hope you are well informed on how the residence of a taxpayer is determined under the double taxation treaties. And from now on, we will have to talk about all the stuff in the middle of a treaty, that is, how the taxation rights for specific kinds of income are distributed between the two countries involved into the treaty. Thanks for watching. Would be nice if you press the like button or recommend the video to others, recommend the channel to others. And naturally, the most nice thing is if you come back and watch the next video. Till then, goodbye.